What if the most graceful woman in the room was the one no one noticed? Until it was too late. At 6:37 p.m. on a rainy Thursday in Manhattan, the warm lights inside Celeste, one of New York's most exclusive fine dining restaurants, glowed like amber through the glass. Inside, everything gleamed. Brass fixtures, marble floors, golden chandeliers, and hand-blown water glasses that cost more than most people's shoes. Everything and everyone was curated. Except for her. Nina Caldwell stepped through the entrance with a quiet confidence that didn't match her outfit. A modest navy blue dress, ballet flats dulled by the wet pavement, and a small canvas tote she clutched like a security blanket. Her chestnut brown hair was twisted into a low bun, a few strands clinging to her face from the misty drizzle outside. She looked like she'd just come from a subway platform, not the sort of woman anyone expected to see here. But she belonged more than they knew. The hostess barely looked up when Nina entered. The woman, blonde, sleek, polished to perfection, was in mid-conversation with a sharply dressed man in a tailored charcoal suit. He laughed at something she said, fingers resting casually on the reservation stand. Nina waited and waited. When the conversation stretched into its second minute, Nina cleared her throat gently. The hostess blinked, her eyes flicking up with forced politeness. "Can I help you?" Nina smiled. "Yes, I have a reservation, Caldwell for one." The hostess's gaze slid over her like a scanner. Flats, tote bag, no designer labels. "One moment," she said coolly, tapping at her tablet. After a few moments of pretend searching, she looked up. "We don't have a Caldwell on the list." Nina tilted her head slightly. "It should be there, made online 3 days ago." The hostess didn't check again. "It's possible the system dropped it. We're fully booked tonight, unfortunately, unless you'd like to wait at the bar, though it may be a while." Nina's eyes drifted past her to the nearly half-empty dining room. "I don't mind waiting." The hostess arched a brow. "As you wish." Nina stepped aside without protest. She didn't roll her eyes or complain. She simply moved to the waiting bench near the door, pulled out a paperback from her tote, and began to read. Her presence, though quiet, disrupted something. A few guests looked up, eyebrows twitching as if trying to place what was off. A woman that beautiful, that poised, shouldn't be dressed like that. Not here. Behind the bar, Ashley Monroe, a senior waitress with 7 years of experience and a sharp tongue, leaned toward the sommelier. "Who let the librarian in?" she muttered, nodding toward Nina. "Wrong zip code, wrong paycheck, and definitely wrong outfit." The sommelier smirked but said nothing. Nina kept reading. 10 minutes passed, then 20. At 7:05 p.m., just as Ashley was finishing her tirade about people crashing classy places for fun, the maitre d', an older man named Charles, with salt and pepper hair and a soft spot for punctual guests, stepped out from the back office, glanced at the front, and frowned. "Nina Caldwell?" he asked. Nina stood, tucking her book away. "Yes. My apologies for the delay. Right this way, Miss Caldwell. We've prepared your table." Ashley watched with narrowed eyes as Charles personally led Nina not to the bar, not to a hidden corner, but to a booth near the central chandelier, across from the grand piano. "Is she someone?" the hostess asked under her breath. Ashley shrugged. "She's dressed like she coupons her coffee." But there was something in the way Nina sat down, thanked Charles, and opened her menu like it was an old friend. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't faking anything. She belonged, and yet she didn't fit, and that made people uncomfortable, especially Ashley. Because Ashley had worked hard to become the kind of woman who fit in. Nina simply was. And somehow, that was more threatening than anything. Ashley approached the table with an air of forced professionalism, the kind that was more performance than service. She carried a water carafe in one hand, menus tucked under her arm, and disdain flickering just behind her carefully lined eyes. Nina looked up with a gentle smile. "Good evening." Ashley gave a tight nod. "Still waiting for the rest of your party?" Nina's brow creased, just slightly. "No, it's just me tonight." "Oh." Ashley's smile twitched. "Of course, solo." She poured water a little too quickly, causing a splash to land on the edge of Nina's napkin. "Our chef's tasting menu is very popular with larger parties. Just something to keep in mind." Nina unfolded the napkin calmly. "Thank you. I'll take a look." Ashley lingered, not moving. Her eyes dropped again to Nina's plain flats, then to the paperback sticking out of her tote bag. its creased spine and soft edges a silent protest against the sleekness of the restaurant. "You sure you're comfortable here?" Ashley asked, her tone dipped in sweet concern. "This section is a little lively for some people." Nina looked around at the elegant couples chatting, the soft music drifting from the grand piano, the candlelit ambiance. "It's lovely. I'm fine here." Ashley tilted her head. "Some guests prefer something quieter, more private. I could move you closer to the kitchen if that feels more familiar." The implication landed with an icy thud. Nina kept her expression steady. "Thank you, but I'd like to stay." Ashley gave a little shrug. "Suit yourself, but we do have a dress code, even if it's more relaxed for women." Nina blinked. "Is there something inappropriate about my attire?" Ashley smirked, glancing down at the cotton dress. "Not inappropriate, just not expected." She turned sharply on her heel, not waiting for a reply, leaving behind a flicker of tension in the air. A couple seated nearby exchanged glances, their smiles faltering. They'd heard every word. Nina exhaled quietly, eyes drifting back to the menu. She didn't belong here, not according to Ashley, not according to the unspoken codes of the room. But she didn't flinch. She stayed. Back at the server station, Ashley leaned against the wall. "I swear, this place is getting soft. First, we let walk-ins sit in the center booth. Now we're hosting thrift store princesses with tote bags full of God knows what." Her coworker Marcus gave a hesitant laugh. "Maybe she just wants a nice dinner," Ashley scoffed. "Sure, and maybe I moonlight as a barista in Brooklyn." Marcus didn't reply. He didn't have to. The guests near Nina's table weren't the only ones who had overheard. Ashley returned to the table 10 minutes later with barely concealed irritation. "Have you decided?" she asked, snapping her pen open. "Yes," Nina replied gently. "I'll have the house salad to start, and then the short rib." Ashley's eyebrows lifted. "You know that's a 32-ounce cut, right? Usually meant to be shared." "I'm hungry," Nina said simply. Ashley pursed her lips. "All right, but if it's too much, I can always bring a to-go box." Nina smiled unfazed. "That's thoughtful. Thank you." Ashley jotted the order and stepped away without another word, but as she passed a nearby table, she leaned in and said under her breath, "She's ordering like she's on a food tour. Probably hasn't seen this side of a menu in her life." This time, the woman at that table frowned. "That's unkind," she said quietly. Ashley straightened, feigning surprise. "Oh, it's just banter." But the atmosphere had shifted. More guests were watching now, not with curiosity but concern. And Nina, still seated quietly at the heart of it all, hadn't raised her voice once. She hadn't needed to. The low hum of conversation filled the room once more, but the tension from earlier still lingered, like a faint crack in a flawless mirror. Nina sipped her water slowly, her hands steady despite the heavy looks now threading through the restaurant. She'd always known how to exist in rooms like this, not because she belonged, but because she refused to let others decide she didn't. Still, the sting from Ashley's words wasn't entirely numbed by silence. Some words stick longer than they should. Then, from 2 tables away, a quiet voice broke the rhythm. "Excuse me," a man said gently. Nina looked up. A distinguished gentleman in a slate blue sweater and pressed shirt leaned slightly in her direction. His hair was silver, but his posture was strong. His eyes, though warm, held something sharper beneath, an edge that suggested he missed very little. "I just wanted to say," he continued, "you've handled everything with remarkable grace." Nina blinked. "Thank you. I'm not sure what else to do." He gave a soft chuckle. "You've already done it." Nina's lips twitched. "It's not the first time someone's assumed I don't belong." "No," he said, nodding. "But it never gets easier, does it?" She shook her head. "It doesn't." "I'm Thomas," he said, offering a small wave. "I eat here more often than I should." "Nina." "Pleasure, Nina." Their brief moment was interrupted as Ashley returned with the appetizer, a small, artfully plated salad that barely filled a quarter of the dish. She placed it down with mechanical efficiency. "Your salad. Enjoy." Then, with a quick glance toward Thomas's table, she added louder, "If you need help identifying any of the ingredients, just let me know." Nina raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Thomas, however, tilted his head. "Ashley, was it?" he said. She turned, startled that a regular patron had addressed her. "Yes, sir?" "I'd keep an eye on your tone. It's starting to echo." Ashley's eyes flickered between Nina and Thomas. I'm just doing my job, sir. No, he replied calmly. You're not. Without waiting for her reply, he returned his gaze to Nina and lifted his wineglass slightly. To first impressions. Nina smiled and tapped her water glass in the air. Cheers. Ashley turned on her heel, muttering under her breath again, but this time her stride had lost a bit of its confidence. Back at her station, she pulled Marcus aside. Did you hear that? Marcus glanced toward Thomas's table. Yeah, I did. Ashley scoffed. Since when does he care about the underdressed? Since now, apparently, Marcus said. Then he added carefully, maybe we should just let her eat? Ashley gave him a look. You're taking her side? I'm taking the side that doesn't end with us in a staff meeting tomorrow morning, he replied. Across the dining room, Nina picked at her salad thoughtfully. Thomas had returned to his own table, reading something on his phone, but his presence now felt like a quiet shield, subtle but solid. She wasn't alone anymore, not fully. The second course came late. Ashley dropped the plate in front of her with a half-forced grin. Short rib, still rare in places. Hope that's how you like it. Nina looked down. The meat was beautifully plated, no denying that, but the tone in Ashley's voice was clear. You don't deserve this. Nina didn't flinch. She picked up her fork and knife, cut into the dish, and took a bite. It melted on her tongue. Perfect. She glanced up to see Ashley watching from the bar, clearly expecting a grimace or complaint. Nina smiled instead, then took another bite. Let them watch, she thought. Let them see me enjoy every bite. By the time Nina had finished her main course, most of the early crowd had dwindled. The hum of the restaurant softened into a quieter rhythm. Light jazz filtered through the speakers, blending with the faint clinking of glassware and low conversation. From her corner, she caught glimpses of Ashley still hovering by the bar, eyes sharp with quiet resentment. But Nina didn't care anymore. Her focus had shifted, because someone else was watching. A man seated alone at table 6, tucked near the far wall, half-shadowed under a dim gold sconce. He hadn't spoken once, hadn't glanced at a menu. He had a half-empty cup of coffee, a leather notebook closed beside it, and an unread book left untouched. But his gaze, thoughtful, steady, had been fixed on her for the last 20 minutes. Not in the way men stared when they thought a woman didn't belong. It wasn't hunger, it wasn't pity. It was recognition. As Nina pushed her plate aside and reached for her water, he stood, slowly, deliberately. He moved toward her table with the kind of quiet confidence that didn't demand attention, but couldn't help drawing it anyway. Nina sat straighter, wary but unafraid. Excuse me, he said, his voice low and even. Would it be too forward if I asked to sit for just a moment? She blinked, surprised at his directness, but more surprised at the warmth in his tone. That depends, she said, gesturing to the seat across from her. Are you here to comment on my outfit or ask if I belong? He smiled, just slightly. Neither. I'd like to apologize, on behalf of everyone who didn't say something sooner. That caught her off guard. He eased into the seat across from her. Close now, Nina saw more clearly. He was in his late 30s, maybe early 40s. Crisp shirt, dark slacks, no tie. Well-groomed, but not flashy. The kind of man who didn't need to prove anything, and probably didn't have much left to prove anyway. You've been sitting over there this whole time, she said. Watching. Observing, he corrected gently. Not just you, her too. He nodded subtly toward Ashley. Nina tilted her head. So? I've seen how she treated you, and how you never gave her what she wanted. She wanted a scene, Nina said flatly. I didn't give her one. He nodded slowly. Exactly. Silence stretched for a beat before he added, My name's Julian. Nina hesitated, then replied, Nina. Nice to meet you, Nina. Julian's eyes didn't wander. They didn't inspect her outfit or her hair or her minimal jewelry. They simply rested, calm and direct, on her face. I hope you don't mind me saying, he continued, but you handled yourself tonight with more composure than most people would have. I'm used to being underestimated, she said, her voice tight but steady. It's not new. Julian nodded again, then reached into his coat pocket and placed something small on the table. A folded linen napkin. Inside it, neatly wrapped, was a delicate flower, a single, soft, white gardenia. Nina frowned slightly. What's this? I saw you touch your necklace earlier, he said. It was the only moment you looked unsure. That's when I realized Someone should remind you that you have nothing to be unsure about. Nina looked at the flower, then back at Julian. You bring flowers to restaurants? Only when I feel like they belong somewhere. She raised an eyebrow. And you think that place is with me? He gave a small smile. I do. Something shifted in the air between them, subtle but undeniable. Nina didn't smile, not yet. But her hand did reach toward the napkin, folding it carefully back over the flower. Thank you, she said quietly. That's unexpected. Julian stood. I didn't mean to interrupt your evening. You didn't. He paused. May I leave my card, just in case you ever want to talk again? Nina hesitated, then nodded. He placed it gently on the table. A simple white card, no title, no company logo, just a name and a number. And then he walked away. As he disappeared through the back entrance of the restaurant, Nina realized she hadn't asked what he did. She hadn't asked anything. And still, somehow, she felt seen. Not for her clothes, not despite her simplicity, but because of it. The soft hum of conversation in Lumiere faded the moment the manager, Mr. Grant Langston, stepped into the dining room. He didn't storm. He didn't raise his voice. But the gravity of his presence was like gravity itself, unavoidable. He walked past gold-dusted menus and polished cutlery, past diners who had paused mid-bite, all eyes tracking him as he made his way toward the far corner of the restaurant. Toward her. Toward Clara Morgan. Clara was seated still, her posture upright, her expression composed. But behind her calm was a storm trying not to spill. Ashley stood beside her, arms awkwardly by her sides, a nervous stiffness taking over her usual poise. Mr. Langston stopped, looked at Clara, then looked at Ashley. Miss Morgan, he said, voice low and respectful. I apologize for the delay. May I sit? Clara nodded slowly, unsure what was happening, but welcoming the change in tone. He sat down across from her, folding his hands on the white tablecloth. I'm Grant Langston, he continued, and I believe you've been treated poorly this evening. Please know, this is not the experience we strive to provide. Ashley turned red. Mr. Langston, she started, but he held up a hand. Not yet, Ashley. Then he turned back to Clara. I don't usually get involved directly, he said, but I've been told several things. Most importantly, that my staff made assumptions about you based on your appearance, that they questioned your place here. Clara's throat tightened. She didn't trust herself to speak. She just nodded once. I'd like to make something clear, Mr. Langston said, standing again, now addressing not just Clara, but the entire restaurant. This establishment was built to be a place where everyone is treated with dignity. Everyone. Silence spread like ripples on still water. He turned to the diners, those who had smirked, whispered, or looked away. And that doesn't just mean the ones who wear suits or diamonds. It means the ones who walk in quietly, the ones who wear denim, the ones who carry stories we don't yet know. Ashley stood frozen, her earlier arrogance now crumbling into pieces on the marble floor. Miss Morgan, Mr. Langston said, I didn't recognize you because I've never had the privilege of meeting you before, but I should have known better than to let someone on my team decide who belongs and who doesn't. He turned to Ashley again. You will report to my office tomorrow morning, not for discipline, for reflection, for re-education, for empathy. He looked around again, eyes sharp. And for everyone here, if you've ever made someone feel small because they didn't look the part, I hope tonight reminds you that character never comes with a price tag. Then he looked at Clara again. Please, stay. Let us serve you properly. Clara looked down at her linen napkin. Her hands trembled slightly. She nodded. Thank you, she whispered. The restaurant had finally quieted. The last of the dinner crowd had gone, and the chandeliers now cast a soft, warm light over the marble floor. In the corner, Clara sat at the bar, her apron untied, her long hair released from its bun, falling gently around her shoulders. Her cheeks still carried the faint redness from the heat of the kitchen and the sting of humiliation. Mr. Stanton, the restaurant owner, stood beside her. You sure you want to do this tonight? He asked. Clara nodded. Yes. If we don't address it now, we teach people that it's okay to judge someone by how they look. The staff gathered. Servers, chefs, the bartender, even the dishwasher. At the back of the room, Ashley stood apart, arms folded tightly, eyes glassy but defiant. Clara stood, facing them all. Tonight wasn't about one rude comment, she began, her voice steady. It was about a culture, one that says only some people deserve kindness, that humility means weakness, that appearances decide your worth. She looked directly at Ashley. And it has to stop. Ashley looked down, then slowly raised her hand. I didn't mean for it to go that far. I thought he was just some guy trying to get attention. Mr. Stanton cut in. That's the point, Ashley. What if he was just some guy? Does that mean he deserved to be laughed at? Mistreated? Dismissed? Silence. Clara continued. The man you mocked didn't just walk away. He chose to say nothing, to eat his meal and leave in silence. But he left a $5,000 tip on a $340 bill, and he left a note. I'd like to read it aloud. She unfolded the napkin, still slightly crumpled, still carrying the ink that had barely dried. To the waitress who made me feel small, thank you. You reminded me of how the world often sees people like Clara. People with quiet strength, with scars we don't bother to understand. But the real thank you is to her. For never lowering herself, for holding on to grace in the face of cruelty. You tried to humiliate me. She reminded me that dignity can't be taken, only given away. I hope you choose better next time. KR, the staff murmured. Ashley's breath caught. Her hands trembled. He was Keanu Reeves, Mr. Stanton added. And yes, he co-owns this restaurant. He comes here often, not because it's fancy, but because of Clara, because of the warmth she brings to this place. Ashley's eyes brimmed with tears. I didn't know. You didn't have to know, Clara said gently. You just had to care. For a moment, the room held its breath. Then Ashley stepped forward. I'm sorry, she said, not defensive, not dramatic, just raw. I judged someone because of his boots, because of a shirt, because I thought I was better, but I wasn't, and I want to learn. I want to do better. Clara walked toward her, placing a hand on her shoulder. Then let's start now. Later that week, the restaurant announced its new motto, engraved on a plaque just inside the entrance. At Maison Lumière, we serve excellence, but more importantly, we serve with kindness. Underneath it, in smaller letters, where every guest is seen, every story honored. 3 months later, Clara stood behind the same bar, not as a waitress, but as the restaurant's new hospitality director. Her scar was still visible, but now it was part of her power. Guests who once came for luxury now returned for something far more rare. A place where they were truly seen. And Ashley? She was still there, not just working, but growing. She now trained new staff, beginning each session with a story, Clara's story, and her own. And in the corner, where it all began, sat a man in a simple jacket and worn boots, sipping tea. No fanfare, no entourage. Just Keanu. When Clara passed by, she placed a fresh slice of pie in front of him. On the house, she said. He smiled. Thank you. No, she replied. Thank you. For believing a simple woman could change everything. Sometimes, the most powerful changes begin not with a speech, a spotlight, or a headline, but with a woman walking quietly into a restaurant, simply being herself. Clara didn't set out to prove anything. She didn't wear designer heels or hide behind a last name that demanded respect. She just showed up, in kindness, in strength, in quiet dignity. And that was enough to change everything. Because when one person dares to hold their head high in the face of ridicule, when someone chooses compassion over cruelty, dignity over revenge, it doesn't just shift the moment. It shifts the room, the system, and maybe the world.